Hello and welcome to today's virtual tour. I'm Kristina. This is Cassidy. We are here at the Missouri Botanical Garden, standing right now in the Goodman Iris Garden, where we have a collection of about 1,200 irises that usually start to peak about a week from now. So you can see that that's beginning to happen. There's a lot more going on here at the garden right now. Water lilies will be put in soon. Azaleas are popping. Roses are on the cusp of blooming as well. So we are going to give you a tour this morning to see everything that is blooming. So, as we were just saying, the irises in the Goodman Iris Garden are starting to bloom. When this garden is at peak, this whole area will be just a rainbow of color. Starting to get there, but definitely not anywhere near its full glory at the moment, but it's really exciting to see some of those start to pop out.
And yeah, you can see a lot of buds on the taller irises that just aren't quite open yet, maybe showing a little peak of color. So they kind of blend in with the leaves right now, the flower stalks. They blend in and make it look a lot more green, but there's a ton of color sort of just on the cusp. Yeah, that's a good example there, where it's not quite open yet. Even this one behind it, you see the real dark colors on these flowers that aren't quite emerged yet and definitely aren't open. You see just next to it what it'll look like when that actually does happen. And yeah, that's true of these. That's mostly true of the taller bearded irises down here, like this juicy tidbit. These little dwarf bearded irises tend to bloom first. So a lot of the color that is here is a little bit lower, which is again playing a bit of a trick of trick of the eye, and kind of hiding some of the things that are open, because there is a good amount of color in these beds already.
And you'll notice, like Juicy Tidbit, a lot of irises have really interesting cultivar names. Like here's one called Bumble Boogie. So those can be kind of fun to look at too while you're enjoying the flowers. Here's kind of a medium height one here. This is called Alliteration. Just a lot of variety in color and in height.
And even so most of these are bearded irises, and they're generally the sort of small, intermediate, or tall is kind of how they're categorized, and that's sort of a height-based thing. But there are some other irises in this bed and in the surrounding beds too that are really interesting, like this one over here, which is a species iris called a beachhead iris. And this is an American native iris, and just really different when looking at all the bearded irises. This one really stands out. The petals aren't nearly as big. It looks a lot more delicate and sort of sharp-edged, I would say.
Yeah.
And the petals come to more of a point. They're
not
less
as frilly.
Yeah, frilly. So there are some species irises and other types of irises in this bed, and in some of the surrounding areas here. So that's kind of a neat thing to pick up on as you're looking around. It's not just these hybridized ones, but
And you can see with these species irises, I have heard before that this is the flower that the fleur-de-lis is designed after or inspired by. You can see that a little more easily with some of these smaller species ones that are a little more pointed, like Cassidy was saying.
and there's even some here with the variegated foliage, sort of cool green and white, or the yellow and green. And yeah, this is just a neat, so there's a little bit of theming going on in some of these beds. So there's a lot more species in this stretch back here. And if I recall, this little corner over here has more of like historic iris varieties, sort of the things that were bred maybe 100 years ago, that eventually got us to the bearded irises that we sort of know of today. So this is actually a display garden for the Historic Iris Preservation Society. We'll just pretend I didn't read that off of the sign that's right here that denotes that. But yeah, this tall iris here, very voluminous.
Yeah, it's big.
So, and this one actually, just to drive home the historic aspect of it, this one here was created in 1927 is when that iris was hybridized. Here's another from 1927 by the same hybridizers, actually. This is called Los Angeles. So just kind of really neat to see all these different, there's a lot of different variations here. And again, you can kind of see from this angle, there's still a lot of green, but again, it's right there. We always say Mother's Day is kind of peak for the iris collection. Mother's Day's on Sunday, so
it's a little early this year.
Yeah,
it's been a cool spring, so it probably won't be quite at peak by this Sunday, but as you can see, it's really coming along, and a week can make a big difference. So it will certainly be worth checking out if you're here on Mother's Day, which the weather is looking really lovely for if the forecast holds true till this weekend. And you could kind of see over the bushes while we were walking through the iris garden some color that's still popping on the central axis here. We have some later tulips. A lot of tulips are past peak and done blooming now. A lot of petals kind of blown off in the wind, or you can see here some examples of ones that are past, but still quite a few blooming. The colors are really nice.
Yeah, and this, every year when it kind of gets to this stage is sort of when our horticulture staff looks at switching out these beds. So in the next few days, actually, these tulips will come out, and then the summer annual display will go in. Some of that can be dictated by the weather, so like this week where it's looking like it might be a little bit on the cool side, rainy and overcast, they may not necessarily be in a hurry to make that change, but that is something that's going to be you'll see changing out here relatively soon, is these tulips coming up, since they've kind of reached the end of their bloom cycle, and then I'm actually really, I never know exactly what they're going to do in these beds when they do these annual displays. Last year there were a lot of papaya. That was a big feature of the summer annual display, was the papayas, and so we'll get a chance to see what they're thinking for this year.
We're passing by some little daffodils, I think, yeah, that are still blooming. Those have been blooming for a while, all different kinds of daffodils. But again, with the tulips, those are kind of on their way out now. And we have been posting and sharing a bit on our social media about the tulips about a week or two ago, telling everyone to come out and see them while they're at their peak. So you can really see how quickly things bloom and then pass here. So if there's a particular flower that you're wanting to see, it's definitely wise to make sure that you do that while you can, because they are short-lived sometimes, the peak bloom times. Just a couple weeks or so that the tulips were looking their very best, and now we're getting close to the end of that. So, but now something that is looking its best is the azaleas and rhododendrons. You can see that already in the background here, or the background, the foreground, I don't know, ahead of us.
In front of us here.
They're so bright you can see them from quite a ways away, so we'll head towards those in a minute here.
We've got our resident sports fans.
Yeah, let's go up a little closer so we can see.
Dressed the Blues starting the Stanley Cup playoffs this week, so showing a little team spirit here.
And these statues were in their Cardinals fans gear just a couple weeks ago for opening day. I guess it's been more than a couple weeks now, but keeping up with the Blues in the playoffs now.
Yeah, and the shrubs behind them here, the backdrop here, are bottle brush buckeye, and so that's just started to leaf out, and the Blues are having a good run in the playoffs if you actually see flowers blooming behind them as the playoffs progress. So we're hoping that's the case this year. While we're here, this is just a really pretty tree to highlight. This is a European beech called Rosia marginata, which means the leaves are pink on the margins, which you can see here, that beautiful pink color. It's a little bit reminiscent at a distance. You might think it's a flowering dogwood or pink dogwood, but no, this is actually the leaf color, and it will hold this color all season. It might fade. It's pretty vibrant right now, actually, and so the vibrancy might fade a little bit, but it'll retain this lovely pink color all year.
And you can see straight ahead, actually, here outside the children's garden, an example of what we were just talking about. It looks like our horticulture team is down here taking out some tulips. You can see on the left side here, the tulips are still planted, and they've just finished taking them out on the other side here. So those should be replaced soon with some summer annuals, again, depending on the weather.
Yeah, those beds don't sit empty for very long. They'll go in shortly, and it's neat. This little area is designed by Tyler, who just walked off here. But so he does the design for this little entry garden, and then there are other horticulturists that work on the design for other spaces, like Central Axis, like the formal garden that's up next to Tower Grove House. Those are all designed by different people on our horticulture staff, and so you kind of get to see a little bit of their personality and the design choices they make, both with the tulips and spring flowering, and then also those summer annuals too.
And here we're coming up on a rhododendron, one of those that I was mentioning a few minutes ago that are really in full bloom right now.
Yeah, it's just this space, and also the Japanese garden. It's just, I mean, it's like somebody dipped a paintbrush in bright pink and then just kind of flung it on the landscape.
And you can see here that these are definitely at or approaching peak, because here's an example of an azalea that is still mostly buds, but there's all this color that's about to open up. So not quite there yet, but then again ahead, yes, this paint explosion like Cassidy was saying. So these are definitely, this is probably the best week, I would guess, depending how much it rains and how much sun they get to see azaleas. But as of today, they are looking really nice. We've had a lot of questions about azaleas this year, actually, and whether or not you can grow them at home. The answer is yes, you can grow them at home for sure, and you can find information about that. If you have questions, you can always email our plant doctors horticulture staff at plantinformation@mobot.org, or you can look at our website. Just search Help for the Home Gardener, the Missouri Botanical Garden, and you'll be able to find information about a lot of different plants, including an 8-page PDF that I was looking at over the weekend. It really tells you everything you could ever want to know about caring for azaleas in your own yard. Another thing I've noticed just in the past week is how much green has come out. You can see that really young, fresh, bright green here as the azaleas are blooming and starting to put out some foliage too, and the whole landscape is looking like that here really just in the past 10 days. That has totally changed the landscape.
Oh, I see some columbine blooming here on this corner as we head into the Lehman Rose Garden. There's some columbine and some wild rose right behind it that's starting to show a few flowers. It's been a minute since I've walked through this this space, and I'm seeing lots of things that are those sort of quintessential May flowers starting to show. There's the ornamental onions here, the alliums. Yeah. Those aren't quite open yet, but they're getting there.
Yeah, let's take a closer look. So again, as Cassidy was just saying, you can see this is starting to open up. For those of you who aren't familiar with what these look like when they're fully in bloom, they're kind of these giant puffballs, the shape of like a dandelion. So they'll be completely round and full of these purple blooms. Here's another one you can see that's just starting to burst open. But those are really fun when they're fully in bloom. And these azaleas around the corner here are just amazing right now. Oh my gosh. All different kinds and colors, shades of pink and red and white on both sides.
And it's sort of neat in this direction where there's a big sort of hedgerow of different types of azaleas. There's also, I believe that's a dogwood behind it. So it's kind of neat to see in that one spot where it carries the color upward into the canopy a little bit. Ooh, I see something really cool that we should go. It's not an azalea or a rhododendron, but it's super cool and we should go check it out.
Let's do it. What is it?
It's back this way. I had a mental note to myself to look for this. So we're kind of going just west of the Lehman Rose Garden. This is an area I don't think a lot of people go to. You certainly can. It's just a lawn space that's not off of, right off of a path. So we're in this sort of spot between the Lehman Rose Garden, the English Woodland Garden, the Boxwood Garden, and the Chinese Garden. So we're surrounded on all sides by gardens that our visitors may know, but this is just a sort of a little space off the beaten path, if you will. And I would encourage you to take this journey as well onto the lawn to come and check out the dove tree. So this is just super cool. You can see these giant white bracts, which are modified leaves, and then this is the flower structure itself. In there is that little poof ball, and it's just such a cool tree.
And from afar, they really do look like flowers, the bracts.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that you remembered this, because I actually remember last year around the same time we did a virtual tour and we came and there were maybe two of these left. So we caught it this year.
But it goes by a lot of different common names. So dove tree is one, or also ghost tree or handkerchief tree. And you can see why, and you know, the wind is really still right now, but if you get a nice little gust going, it just really picks up everything, and that movement adds another dimension to it.
And then behind us here, you can see kind of the last blooms of some white red buds, it looks like.
Yeah.
You can see them blooming straight off the branches and trunk here. But again, now starting to leaf out as those blooms kind of finish up.
This is another one that's Mayapple, I believe.
Yeah, and how appropriate now that it is May.
Yeah.
That these would be blooming. So
And
these are kind of hidden.
Right. Yeah. You wouldn't know it. That I think most people know to look for this because it's sort of clump forming and has this really distinguishable foliage, and you wouldn't know that hiding underneath, just because of the way the leaves are, is hiding this little white flower. So this is a whole little patch of
hidden
these
flowers.
pretty spring flowers that are hidden. And there's actually, we're on the again in that sort of space between a few different more notable garden areas, but the English woodland garden actually has quite a few plants, that are blooming like really close to the ground, or sort of low key like that, where the blooms themselves are kind of hidden, but they're really neat if you take the time to get down low and take a look. There's another columbine of some sort of variety. The ones we saw earlier, the red and yellow ones, are native. This one's kind of hot pink.
And here's that dogwood that Cassidy was mentioning from afar. A lot of these are in bloom right now as well. And again, just these azaleas here, it's amazing. So many fully blooming, looking really good.
And there's more too. This is a it's called a red horse chestnut. It's in the buckeye family. Really pretty clusters of these pink blooms. So this is in the same family as those bottlebrush buckeye or the Ohio buckeye. Red buckeye is another one that's really popular in the landscape. I don't know if those are blooming right now. I haven't seen any.
Here's another red bud that still has some blooms left on its main trunk, but the branches themselves are pretty much done.
Another way you know it's spring is they've started to turn on the fountains here.
Yes.
We've walked past a few of them.
It's a good feeling.
There's another one that they've managed to turn on. This is just a really nice view, a great place to stop if it's a sunny day and you need to get out of the sun for a little bit. But I really like this view of the garden every time of year, but especially once the trees kind of fill in, because it just draws your eye really far down the path. And Matthew, who takes care of this area, does a really great job in here. So,
and May, for this garden, May and June are kind of one of the best times to be here. So this is just starting to come into its most beautiful time. But because it's in kind of the center of the garden, I think sometimes you can do a whole lap and accidentally miss this area, but I would say definitely be sure to walk through here in the next couple months, because as Cassidy was saying, more of those late spring, early summer flowers are just starting to come out, and this is only going to look better and better.
Yeah, there's a lot of lilies in here. Obviously the ornamental onions, I can see them all over the place.
Roses,
not open yet.
of course.
And obviously roses. This is a rose garden, but it's not, the garden has two rose gardens, and the one that's up closer to the entrance is a lot more formalized and much more rose heavy. This one, the beds aren't quite as structured, geometrically structured, and there's just a lot more variety of plants aside from roses that's mixed in, and when it all starts to bloom, the way those plants and that color palette mixes together is really neat to see.
So thank you all for coming along with us today on this tour. We hope you can come visit in person, especially if you're a fan of the azaleas, sometime soon. In the meantime, we will see you next time.